Hey everyone, welcome back to Planting Thoughts. I'm Mike, and today I'm flying solo because Manon is off at a wedding, probably wearing a black veil and explaining to the bridesmaids how the bouquet toss is actually a ritualized survival of the fittest competition. Last week, if you tuned in, we explored the world of ASMR. Manon put me through the ringer with whispering, tapping, and what I can only describe as the most sensual Dorito crunch in podcast history. If you missed it, go back. It's kind of hilarious. But today we're digging into something heavier, something a bit more personal: drug use, drug marketing, and the psychology of addiction. We'll explore the brain science, the behavioral traps, the cognitive loops, and the latest drug trends affecting teens. And I'll share why I originally wanted to be a drug and alcohol counselor and why I walked away. So grab some water, put down that third Monster Energy. Seriously, put it down, and let's get into it. All right, succulents, let's start tonight's episode right where every story of addiction begins, in the brain. Because if you don't understand the biology, the psychology doesn't fully make sense. So for years, people thought addiction was all about dopamine, this little molecule that makes you feel good, right? And yes, dopamine is at the center of the story, but it's not just the pleasure chemical. What dopamine really does is signal wanting. Every drug that you can think of, whether it's heroin, cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, they hijack what's called the mesolimbic reward pathway. That's the ventral tegmental area shooting dopamine up into the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. It's the brain saying, wow, that was good. Let's do it again. But here's the twist. Over time, it's not even about the drug itself anymore. It's about the cues. Robinson and Berridge, two addiction researchers, called this incentive sensitization. Basically, your brain wires itself so that the sight of a bottle, the smell of a bar, even just walking by the site that you used to use, all of this lights up your reward center pathways like it's a Christmas tree. You don't even just want the drug, you want everything around it. Now, let's talk reinforcement, because addiction is basically psychology's perfect storm of learning gone wrong. At the beginning, it's positive reinforcement. You take the drug, you get the euphoric high, your brain learns. Yes, do that again. But over time, the script flips. You don't just take the drug to feel amazing anymore, you take it to avoid the horrible feeling. That's negative reinforcement. The anxiety, the shakes, the gut-wrenching cravings. Using relieves that. Neuroscientists Koob and Lemole describe addiction as the shift from chasing pleasure to just running from pain. And that's one reason people say quitting feels like it's fighting your own biology. And speaking of biology, here's where your memory sneaks in. Your hippocampus and amygdala are like the scrapbook keepers of your drug use, right? They tag the emotions, the settings, the friends, the songs, and they store them. So years later, when someone's in recovery or someone in recovery walks past a bar they used to drink in, right, that memory circuitry fires off. It's why relapse can happen out of really nowhere. Those networks never fully disappear. And then Hyman, another addiction researcher, even called addiction a disorder of learning and memory. But here's the cruel part. The very system that should help you fight back gets weaker. And I'm talking about the prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO. It's the area that handles impulse control, long-term planning, judgment. Chronic drug use literally reduces activity and gray matter volume in this region. So the voice in your head that says, don't do it, it gets quieter and quieter the longer addiction runs. And then add stress to the mix. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, basically your body's stress response system, I guess. This goes haywire with addiction. Cortisol, that stress hormone, these levels fluctuate. Stress sensitivity goes up, and the stress itself becomes one of the biggest triggers for relapse. Researcher Rajita Sheena has shown that high-stress situations light up craving circuits just as much as drug cues do, which helps explain why people with trauma histories or stressful environments are especially vulnerable to substance use. Now, what does all of this mean over time? Occasional use. The brain can usually recover after the drug wears off, but with chronic use, the brain adapts. Dopamine receptors downregulate, meaning that the natural rewards like food, relationships, hobbies, they all kind of feel flat over time. life becomes gray unless the drug is involved. Nora Volkow's team at the National Institute on Drug Abuse has shown that reduced dopamine receptor levels in cocaine and meth users, and that reduction tracks directly with the loss of control, the compulsive use. So here's the bottom line. Addiction isn't just someone being weak or making bad choices. It's their reward system rewired, their stress system hijacked, their impulse control dampened, and their memory networks locked into the drug. Quitting isn't just about willpower. It's literally about trying to outthink your own rewired biology, your own brain. And honestly, I think that's what makes addiction both terrifying and human. Terrifying because the brain is so plastic that it can get rewired against your best interests. But human because understanding this means we can treat people not like failures, but like individuals whose biology and psychology has been taken hostage by a chemical substance. They're people. And like I said earlier, addiction is fueled by this thing called reinforcement learning. You've got the rewards, aka positive reinforcement. The drug produces euphoria, calm, or energy, right? It feels rewarding, so you repeat it. Then you've got its sneaky little cousin, negative reinforcement. When the drug removes something unpleasant, like anxiety, withdrawal symptoms, or physical pain, relief itself is addictive. Think about nicotine. The buzz reinforces use, but so does the relief of avoiding withdrawal jitters. That's a double hook. Operant and classical conditioning working together. Drug taking gets reinforced every time it reduces stress or brings pleasure. With classical conditioning, neutral cues become triggers. Pavlov's dog salivated at a bell. An alcoholic might crave at the sight of a bar sign. Siegel's work in 1983 even showed that tolerance becomes context dependent. Rats overdosed when given their usual morphine dose in a new environment because their bodies hadn't learned to prepare. Same goes for humans. Anton in 1999 described cognitive obsession, drug-related thoughts. They hijack working memory, crowding out everything else. Addicts also fall into what is called attentional bias. They literally pay attention more to the drug cues in their environment. ERP studies show longer reaction times when addicts are presented with drug words versus neutral ones. There's also delayed discounting, choosing immediate reward, the high, over long-term goals. Research by Bickel and Marsh in 2001 found addicts disproportionately pick immediate rewards even when bigger rewards are right around the corner. They have a really hard time delaying that gratification. And this kind of starts that spiral of relapse, right? And Marlatt and Gordon's relapse model in 1985 showed that in a high-risk situation, stress, peer pressure, etc., if they have weak coping responses, right, it leads to guilt, shame, etc., abstinence violation effect, right? I already blew it. I might as well just binge. And then the spiral continues. And then there's like these social environmental reinforcements, right? It's not just the brain, it's the world. If your peer uses, or if your peers use, if your neighborhood normalizes it, if music and media glamorize it, then quitting feels like swimming against the cultural tide. Peer influence research shows that teens escalate use if surrounded by peers who use. So addiction isn't weakness. It's the perfect storm of brain chemistry, learning, cognition, and the environment. Now, what are some of those drugs out there? We've got the opiates or opioids, things like heroin, morphine, oxycontin, fentanyl, right? And these have positive effects like unmatched pain relief, calm euphoria, but there's dangers, right? I mean, with every drug, there's going to be some serious dangers. Overdose with fentanyl, respiratory depression, right? 80,000 annual deaths in the US from opioids. That's from the CDC in 2023. In the long term, brain stress systems overactivated, increased depression and anxiety. And then you've got the drug type depressants, things like alcohol, barbiturates, Xanax, things like this. Some of the positive effects, why people take this stuff, is it leads to relaxation, sedation, some reduced anxiety. People can sleep again. Right? The dangers are things like blackouts, impaired driving, respiratory failure when mixed with other things, long-term memory loss, cognitive decline, and if you're a drinker, alcohol-related dementia. And third, we have the stimulants, right? It's kind of the opposite of the depressants. They stimulate nervous system activity, things like cocaine, meth, nicotine, caffeine, coffee in the morning. Positive effects include energy, alertness, confidence. Dangers, paranoia, heart attack even, stroke, long-term cortical thinning, altered decision-making. And then we have the psychedelics, things like LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, things like this. The positive effects, mystical experiences, potential therapeutic effects. In fact, they're using psychedelics a lot in therapy these days. Some of the dangers, bad trips, psychosis in vulnerable individuals. So like if you're someone that's having a really bad day, you probably shouldn't be taking this stuff, especially if you're not in the care of someone who can sort of lead you through it like a therapist. All right. In the long term, psychedelics actually have a very low addiction potential. Classic psychedelics are not considered physically addictive, right? There's little evidence of withdrawal symptoms or compulsive drug-seeking behavior. The reason that classic psychedelics don't really addict you like the other drugs is that they don't really strongly activate the brain's dopamine reward system in the same way that like nicotine, cocaine, or opioids do. And dopamine in areas like the nucleus accumbens is what drives compulsive drug seeking. And so psychedelics may increase dopamine slightly in some areas, but not enough to create craving or withdrawal. So in short, your brain says, whoa, slow down. So tolerance, not give me more. Addiction. All right. Now let's talk about something that's important with teens and what's trending with teens today, because it's not just, weed and beer anymore. Like there's this new thing called Delta 8 THC, marketed as legal weed. And it's really just derived from hemp, right? It's weaker than Delta 9 THC, but still psychoactive. The problem, poor regulation. Some products contain contaminants or a higher potency than actually labeled. Then there's this new THC-P, which is a new cannabinoid, right? It reportedly up to like 30 times more potent than THC in binding affinity. It's not very researched, so it could be potentially risky. And then there's kratom, which is a Southeast Asian plant marketed as natural, right? And it contains something like an opioid, basically. And users report pain relief and energy and things like this, but the FDA has warned that dependence can happen with stuff like this. Then you've got energy drinks like Monster and Prime and Bang and so forth, and there's no relieving FDA requirements on some of this stuff. And some of these cans can pack like 300 milligrams plus per shot. That's 3 cups of coffee in a can. Now combine that with nicotine or alcohol or something like this, and you've got a recipe for heart problems in teenagers, heart arrhythmias. Nicotine pouches, vapes, right? They're marketed as sleek and safe, and nicotine salt formulas hit harder and faster than old school cigarettes, increasing risk of long-term dependence. And trends show that while cigarette smoking has dropped in teens, vaping and novel substances are skyrocketing. And the packaging is slick, the flavors sound like candy, right? And the risk is often hidden. But believe me, this stuff has some real risks. And now there's this new thing called nitazenes. Pronounce it however you want. Nitazenes, what now? They're basically the supervillains of the opioid world. We're talking fentanyl's evil cousin. Now, decades ago, these were cooked up in labs for pain relief, but now they've gone rogue. They've hit the street. Imagine fentanyl, but several times stronger. Tiny amounts, like a speck, smaller than your pinky nail, can cause someone straight to the ER, or worse. They don't even make it to the ER. It's like that one chip challenge, but instead of a spicy tortilla chip, it's a drug that could kill you. No fun TikTok video here. Just a tombstone. And the scary part, these drugs are showing up mixed with heroin, fentanyl, or even counterfeit pills. So someone thinks they're taking a pain pill and suddenly their body's in a panic. Naloxone can help. Sometimes you need multiple doses. Imagine giving CPR to a person that keeps playing whack-a-mole with your effort. It's kind of like what it feels like for these first responders, right? You just can't bring them back. Now, why would anyone risk this? Partly risk-taking, partly social pressure, and partly the myth that stronger always equals better. Plus economic stress, isolation, and curiosity, and boom, people try it. And sometimes their curiosity costs more than just a night of sleep. So nitazenes are terrifying because they're invisible, they're deadly, and unpredictable. But on the prescription side, things are shifting in a quieter, but let's be honest, an equally concerning way. And so when you look at things like prescription opioids, remember those leftover pills from your wisdom teeth surgery? Yeah, people don't just throw them away. Sharing a pill, taking a little extra, That's misuse. And sometimes it's a stepping stone to the stronger stuff like fentanyl or nitazenes. Tiny steps, big consequences. In fact, it's the number one reason people get hooked on heroin in the first place, raiding mommy's pill cabinet. It's kind of like eating one cookie and then wondering why you're in a sugar coma. Only in this case, the sugar coma might just land you in the AR. Now, ADHD stimulants, Adderall, Ritalin, Vyvanse, right? They're a whole other story. Once upon a time, they were meant to help focus, but now they're the unofficial fuel for finals week. Students taking them to study for 12 hours straight or trying to cram in last-minute work. And adults, well, let's just say productivity culture is basically a love letter to stimulants. You know, the kind of people who drink coffee by the gallon to focus, but then think, hey, a little Adderall couldn't hurt. Yeah. Your heart and your brain might disagree. The trickiest part is that misuse often feels safer than street drugs, right? You could pop a pill from your friend's backpack, no scary powders, no mystery blends, just temporary focus. But behind the scene, your sleep, your mood, and your heart are waving red flags. Help me. Right? It's like a traffic jam in your chest. And studies show that early misuse can make people more vulnerable to other substance problems down the line. So, what seems like a harmless shortcut, oh, I'm just going to take a little Vyvanse to help me focus for my finals, it's more like a detour to danger, right off a cliff. And that cliff might lead to a heart attack. And for me, this isn't just some abstract thing, right? Addiction has always run pretty heavily through my family. My dad struggled with alcohol when he was young. My mom had an accident in her 30s and slowly became addicted to pain pills over around a 10-year time span. My uncle drank himself into oblivion. My aunt contracted AIDS after sharing needles with her heroin-using boyfriend. I had cousins who experimented with things like cocaine and weed, you name it. I mean, 2 of my female cousins even ended up in prison with drug-related charges. And then, growing up in the 80s, all I saw were these "Just Say No" posters, right, that Nancy Reagan had hung up all around the schools. And, you know, and then those commercials, "This is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs. Any questions?" And it would show an egg flying into the frying pan. You go, yeah, I had a ton of questions. But the problem with our society seems to be that adults typically think that informing people or kids about drugs, things like this, are going to make kids run out and do drugs. But that's not how this works. People need to be informed so they can make informed decisions. And it's for these reasons and more that I wanted to become a drug and alcohol counselor, to fight back against what tore my family apart. But during the internship and at this clinic, and I was there for maybe, I don't know, about around 6 months, and I would watch this brutal cycle up close, right? Clients would walk in full of hope, and then weeks later they would walk back in, relapsed, defeated, and it was constant. And it kind of broke me, to be honest. I realized I was not built for that level of heartbreak on a day-to-day basis. I wasn't ready to face something that hit so close to home. So I chose education instead, and why I don't sit across from addicts anymore, I hope, I get to plant seeds in young minds, to teach them, to warn them, to spark curiosity. It's my way of staying in the fight, but without losing myself. And it's easy to lose sight of the facts when we talk about addiction, that it's not just biology and psychology. It's also culture. And one of the most powerful cultural forces is the way Hollywood and the music industry portray drug use. Think about the tropes. The tortured genius who needs drugs to create beautiful art. The rock star lifestyle of endless partying. The rapper flexing surrounded with smoke clouds in a music video. Even movies like Wolf of Wall Street and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, right? They show the rush, the chaos, the wild ride. The problem, the first half of the story is glamorized. The creativity, the confidence, the high. The second half, the collapse, is sometimes skipped. And psychologically, this matters. The social learning theory by Albert Bandura in 1977 tells us that we imitate models we admire. If your favorite musician or actor is constantly portrayed as cool, right, while using, the behavior becomes normalized, even aspirational in some ways. Addiction research shows that media exposure correlates with earlier and riskier use in teens. Primack et al. Found in 2019 that adolescents exposed to more substance use in movies were more likely to start smoking and drinking. Honestly, watching Euphoria sometimes feels like scrolling through late-night TV and hitting the Drug and Chaos infomercial channel. Call now and we'll throw in heartbreak, bad decisions, and teen drama. Absolutely free. But the unglamorous reality is littered with tragedy. Think Kurt Cobain, heroin and depression intertwined, ending in suicide at 27 years old. Amy Winehouse, alcohol poisoning after years of public struggle. Whitney Houston, drowned in a hotel bathtub. Cocaine and heart disease playing a huge role. Heath Ledger, accidental overdose from prescription medications, that medicine cabinet I was talking about earlier. Mac Miller, fentanyl-laced pills, another young artist gone too soon. And for every story of creative inspiration fueled by substance, there are dozens of careers derailed, lives lost, and families left grieving. And this is a double bind for teens, right? The media sends a contradictory message, which puts them in this double bind. This is fun, sexy, rebellious, artistic. But in reality, destroys your health, your relationships, and sometimes your life. And that's where cultural psychology collides with behavioral psychology. When the images we admire reinforce risk-taking, it becomes harder to weigh the real costs. And for teens, the real danger is something that society basically promotes as an accepted way to act like a complete buffoon and risk yours and others' lives. And what are we talking about there? I want to speak directly to teens and anyone in the college or party scene listening. This one's for you. Alcohol isn't just party juice. It's a powerful psychoactive drug, and the way that our culture treats it makes it really hazardous for young people. First, why alcohol is deceptively dangerous. First, alcohol works on GABA, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it works on these systems in the brain. And at low doses, it lowers anxiety and inhibition. Thanks, GABA. And at higher doses, it impairs memory formation, motor control, and breathing via depressed brainstem activity. A standard drink in the US has around 14 grams of pure ethanol. Legal impairment in many places is judged at blood alcohol 0.08. But impairment begins well below that. Reaction time, judgment, and coordination degrade progressively as blood alcohol content rises. So don't treat 0.08 as a safe threshold. And then you have things like blackouts, memory loss, dangerous risk-taking, and they're not that rare. They're predictable at rapidly high blood alcohol content. Rapid drinking, stuff that you might actually see a lot in colleges, right? With the shotgunning the beers and things like this, right? This can cause like really high BAC spikes and is the main driver of acute harm like death. So how much alcohol can kill? Fatal alcohol poisoning is typically associated with very high blood alcohol concentrations, commonly in the range of about 0.3 to 4.4 BAC. But there's big individual differences, and this has to do with like tolerance, body weight, health, medications, etc. What's kind of scary though is a 110-pound female would only need roughly about 6 standard drinks consumed fairly quickly to reach the BAC of 0.30. Mixing alcohol with other depressants dramatically increases the risk of fatal respiratory depression, even at lower BACs than those numbers above. And the effects of alcohol at varying levels, right? I mean, 0.01 to 0.05, you're getting slight relaxation, lowered inhibition. At moderate levels, stuff like 0.05 to 0.15, I guess, impaired judgment, slower reaction time, memory encoding starts to break down. You may have trouble forming lasting memories at this point, right? Reduced motor coordination. And this is where risky choices, texting, that ex that you shouldn't be texting, climbing fences, driving, become much more likely. At a high concentration, 0.15 to 0.30, confusion, blurred speech, blackouts, vomiting, risk of aspiration, choking if you pass out on the vomit, danger zone. Very high would be like 0.3 to 0.4, coma, depressed breathing, hypothermia, life-threatening, immediate medical attention required. Now, why are teens especially vulnerable to this kind of stuff? They have a developing brain. The adolescent brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex that handles things like judgment, impulse control, and planning, this keeps developing into the person's mid-20s. Alcohol exposure during this window can impair that development and increase risk for long-term cognitive and memory problems. There's also like this higher addiction risk. Early onset of drinking correlates with higher lifetime risk of alcohol and other drugs. The younger someone begins heavy drinking, the more likely they are to develop a problematic relationship with alcohol. And the problem is, we have like the college and the party culture in this country, and it normalizes binging, pre-gaming, drinking games, peer challenges, games. The social reward systems make doing stupid stuff feel worth it in the moment. And also, alcohol and energy drinks, this is a really bad combo. Mixing alcohol with high caffeine energy drinks masks the sedative effects of alcohol. You feel alert, while your motor skills and your judgment are slowly downgrading. That mismatch increases risk-taking, alcohol consumption, and cardiovascular stress. Some energy drink formulations with very high caffeine can also precipitate palpitations and arrhythmias, especially in susceptible teens. In the long term, chronic heavy drinking, it leads to things like liver disease, pancreatitis, increased cancer risk. The Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome causes severe memory loss. More subtle long-term cognitive decline also occurs in chronic heavy alcohol users. Mental health. Alcohol worsens depression and anxiety in the long term. It can also hide and exacerbate underlying disorders. So if you drink, especially you teens out there, which I don't suggest you do, but if you do, pace yourself. Avoid rapid drinking, chugging, rounds, shots. Rapid intake, right? This leads to those blackouts and the poisoning risk. Never mix alcohol with opioids or stimulants. This is where fatalities actually spike. Do not drive. Use a sober ride app. Designate a driver or sleep where you are if you must. If someone is passed out and unresponsive after heavy drinking, call emergency services. In the U.S., poison control is 1-800-222-1222 and can advise, but do not hesitate to call 911 if breathing is shallow or absent. This is practical safety guidance, and if you're underage, the safest option is to avoid alcohol. Early use increases risks across the lifespan. All right, look, alcohol is treated like background noise in our culture, but biologically, it's a potent drug. For teens, it's not a harmless rite of passage. It's a developmental disruptor, a risky decision magnifier, and at high doses, it can kill you. If you or a friend are drinking, slow down the pace. If someone's passed out, get medical help. That's a life-saving call, not a drama. All right, succulents, that's today's planting thoughts. We've gone from dopamine system to delta 8, from the reinforcement learning to relapse spirals, and from a family struggle to the broader social forces that make drugs so hard to resist. If you got something out of today's episode, here's how you can help me out. Tap that follow on Spotify, hit that subscribe and like on YouTube. Share planting thoughts with a friend who might need it. And remember, curiosity is a seed. Plant it, water it, let it grow. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and take care of your brain. Bye.